Yeah, hi folks. Yes, our dear leader has bribed the Taliban, but of course it's been masked as humanitarian aid. But this is par for the course from Ardern. She sold out Australia and New Zealand to communist China. She sold out New Zealand to radical Maori separatism. She sold out our female athletes to the transgender agenda, and now she's selling out New Zealand to the Taliban. Now watch these consecutive segments from News Hub last night and you'll see what I mean.
The first New Zealanders evacuated from Afghanistan are beginning their 2 weeks in managed isolation tonight. A flight from Melbourne landed in Auckland just after 5 o'clock this afternoon, carrying the first group of citizens, their families and other visa holders. The Defence Minister's office wouldn't say whether it included Afghan interpreters who helped New Zealand during their deployment in Afghanistan. The evacuees were among hundreds flown from Kabul to Al Minhad Air Base near Dubai by the Australian Defence Force last week.
In the last 24 hours, we have evacuated over 450 people from Kabul on those 4 ADF flights, including Australian and New Zealand citizens.
Yeah, so as our New Zealand citizens arrive home,
our Defence Force has now arrived to help support evacuation efforts from the Middle East with 19 personnel based in Kabul.
This happens.
Meanwhile, a Taliban official has paid tribute to New Zealand and thanked the government for its gift of financial aid to Afghanistan. The government announced $3 million in humanitarian aid last week, and in an interview with Al Jazeera, the Taliban spokesperson said the act of generosity had been noted.
And we thank the generous offer of New Zealand in this time of crisis and time of need for our people, that most of whom are living below poverty line. New Zealand has been the leading country, as it has always been during humanitarian causes.
Humanitarian causes, my ass. That is just code for bribe or ransom payment.
The chaos at Kabul airport continues, and NATO says at least 7 people have died in recent days. One woman who got out gave birth on the US evacuation flight to Doha.
Yeah, and of course our woke dear leader will take in refugees from that mess.
New Zealand should accept an emergency intake of Afghan refugees. That's the message from a top scholar who fled the Taliban for life in New Zealand on board the ship the Tampa. 2 decades since the Tampa incident, survivors in New Zealand are watching history repeat. Here's Q&A's Jack Tame.
They fled the mountains of Afghanistan but almost died at sea. In August 2001, more than 400 asylum seekers were plucked from a sinking boat in the Indian Ocean to the safety of the container ship the Tampa. Exactly 20 years on, the survivors are watching as the Taliban retake Afghanistan.
I'm calling for the New Zealand government to take in an emergency intake of Afghan refugees.
Abbas Nazari studied international security as a Fulbright scholar.
Just the arc of life has just circled exactly back. Nothing's changed. You know, we left in 2001 because the fighting that was in Ghazni, the city, it was almost about to reach our village. And now, 20 years later, it's exactly the same situation.
He says New Zealand has a moral responsibility to accept Afghan refugees in addition to our usual intake.
No, it's not our responsibility. It's the responsibility of Muslim countries.
As it was under the Key government in 2015 when they approved an emergency intake of Syrian refugees. There is precedent for this, and there is capability within our government to do so.
No, there isn't capability. We don't have houses now.
2 decades ago, after Australia's government tried to block the asylum seekers, New Zealand's government struck a more empathetic tone.
We have offered to admit up to 150 of the asylum seekers from the Norwegian vessel the Tampa for processing and eventual resettlement.
Watching events in Afghanistan this week, the government says its top priority is helping Afghans who provided direct support and assistance to New Zealand.
These guys just want a safety, the ability to thrive in a foreign land, just as we did. And I think that is more than doable.
20 years ago, when Afghans fled the Taliban, New Zealand gave them a new home.
Stay there, stay there.
Afghanistan has fallen. The question now, to what extent will history repeat? Jack Tame, One News.
Anyway, here's a message for our woke dear leader.
You know what woke means? It means you're a loser. Everything woke. Everything woke. It's true. Everything woke turns to shit, okay?
Yeah, I couldn't resist that, folks. That's so true. Yeah, now folks, you may have noticed that the mainstream media have collectively turned against Biden over this Afghanistan debacle, which is a clear sign they are preparing to get rid of their useful idiot. They now want to bring in their first choice candidate, Kamala Harris. Heaven forbid, it's about to get worse.